Hey, welcome to an episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. To have a really cool review, guys, from the brand Wolbrook watches. They were originally founded out of the US back in 1949. They're a legacy brand revival along with sister brand Douglas watches. They're now a member of France Horology, the professional union of French watchmakers, and the sister brand to HGP, which has been featured on the channel in the past. And these are now all offering watches that are proudly assembled and QC'd in France. In terms of type of watches, this is a dive watch, some key common characteristics and design when you're looking for a diver. Of course, you're going to find that water resistance, typically some type of screw down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelets. This is the Skindiver automatic in that blue colorway, which I think is great now for the time of this review because they just discontinued the Black Bay 58 blue that was also in a kind of dark, more subdued colorway. This particular Skindiver is Wolbrook's signature Skindiver, paying homage to the vintage models from their back catalog featuring their modern hexaplex case architecture, which essentially places rubber shock absorbers around the metal movement holder. This goes for $508 direct. Currently, this piece was kindly lent in by Wolbrook for the purpose of this review. But of course, all thoughts and feedback are always my own. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, again, with that discontinuation of the Tudor Black Bay 58 blue, something like this, I could easily see, having a little bit of a surge of more interest. So I did want to cover this piece on the channel. I mean, it's a brand I've had my eye on. They actually do have some upcoming releases that I'm really excited about. But this one right here is one that I've had my eye on. And again, appreciate the brand for responding when I reached out. Now, in terms of the dimensions here, it's actually 39 millimeters at the case, but there is a little bit of overhang on that bezel, as you guys can see. Now, with that overhang, you're getting a 40 millimeter bezel. So that means that you're going to have roughly, of course, the footprint of a 39 on the wrist, but you're going to have visually more something more representative of a 40 millimeter, which is a bit more of a sweet spot. So I think that's nice. In terms of the thickness, guys, about 13.3 millimeters, and that is, of course, all measured on my own calipers, 48 millimeters lug to lug, stainless steel, mostly brushed. Now, you're also going to have this nice boxed sapphire crystal with an inner anti-reflective coating and 120 click bezel. This coin edge is quite nice. That overhang does help. Very nice and audible. And maybe, yeah, there's a little wiggle there, but nothing crazy. Still feels quite precise. And I mean, the acoustics on this bezel really quite nice. So I gotta do that again. Yeah. And the alignment's nice as well. So very cool. Now, you're going to have an aluminum insert, but it does have a fully lumed pip there. At the 12 o'clock, you do have a signed screw down crown. And then inside the movement, although you can't see it through that solid case back, is actually the automatic Miyota 8315. And this is the later generation of it, so it's more elevated. It's going to, I know a lot of us have experience. I personally did not have the best experiences with Miyota 8000 series movements that were more so in line with the 8200 line, but at the 8315 trim level here, I have to say I'm actually really impressed. One, it has hacking. It always had hand winding, but now it has hacking, and I will say it's even the crown action, the winding action is good. The stem is way more consistent in terms of engaging when it's getting the hack versus what I've experienced in the past. So that kind of has put me off on 80 or 8000 series Miyota movements. I will say this 8315 definitely has impressed me. It has a 60-hour power reserve, beats at 3 hertz or 21,600 vibrations per hour in terms of that beat rate. So relatively smooth. But guys, you got to remember also a lot of brands are lowering their beat rate to extend their power reserves. So, you know, if you're still excited about it to so PRX and it has 3 hertz, then you really shouldn't be looking down on this watch that also has a 3 hertz sweep. Also something to note is that, yeah, even more expensive watches like Longines or even Omega actually all have lower beat rates than the standard 4 hertz, right? They're actually at 3.5 hertz. So instead of 8 ticks per second, they're 7 ticks. This is 6 ticks. So this is going to be more in line with, you know, what you might expect from SeaQ or again of Citizen. But the nice thing is this has also been tuned to an in-house accuracy of plus or minus 15 seconds per day, which isn't too shabby. Of course, that is the extreme ends. This is what you're going to go into warranty range for, right? If you're outside of plus or minus 15. And it doesn't mean that's where you're going to be at. You know, it's just like mileage may vary, right? City miles versus highway miles and everything like that. So there's going to be a lot of different variables within that, but hey, they're willing to say that this is accurate to plus or minus 15 seconds per day. So that would mean that it should be able to perform generally much better than that because that is the extreme end. Now, in terms of that dial, beautiful matte blue dial with printed indexing, polished hands, and supernova BGW9. So you get blue in the daylight, blue in the dark in terms of that glow. It also has 15 atmospheres or 150 meters of water resistance. And I have to say that's a sweet spot for me. Obviously, 200 has been the ISO standard for the longest time. And in Japan, I mean, it even recently switched to 300. But I will say, I mean, especially when you're thinking about a classic diver and also realistically, right? Most recreational dives will be 40 meters or less. So having something like this screw down crown with 150 meters of water resistance is really going to be more than enough. And it's going to help you maintain a bit of a thinner profile, which I like. So as much as I think visually and checking box wise, you know, 300 meters of water resistance is kind of the sweet spot. I think in terms of a thin skin diver, if I was, you know, if I had a micro brand and I was making a watch, I would absolutely shoot for the thinnest 150 meter dive watch I could create. And I would put it in a nice small silhouette, probably have something similar to here with a smaller case and then a little bit of an overhang for that bezel for the tactile engagement. So I like what they're doing there. Of course, this is going to look familiar because this is a very, you know, popularized. This wasn't just by Wolbrook or Douglas in the past. There was a lot of brands, very old legacy brands that had very similar you know, this type of style of case. I mean, a lot of people recognize this as kind of a 62 MAS styling. Of course, the 62 MAS from SeaQ was one of many skin divers that shared a very similar silhouette back in the day. But then there's also brands like, you know, Glashutte, who have some really cool old school skin divers with a similar look and feel. Of course, now really upscaled in terms of even SeaQ, right? Really upscaling those models to feel more premium. This definitely has more of a tool watch vibe, which I like. You know, very minimalist in terms of any decoration. This is nice and satinized everywhere. Even the dial is nicely matte. Yeah, it just feels like a true tool watch, and I can appreciate that. It has a 20 millimeter lug width, pierced lugs there, or drilled lugs, depending on your vernacular. And this does have the very cool all satin beads of rice bracelet that does have some really cool contouring, where you have some nice lines of definition there on those center links, which I really like. So similar to the HGP bracelet there, and in a very good way. That's a handsome bracelet, and it is also quite comfortable because it has that 20 down to 16 millimeter taper. It does have split pin construction, which I don't mind. You know, screws, are they better? Sure, but split pin is the easiest one to adjust, even easier than screws in my opinion, because you don't have to worry about stripping them ever. And then, of course, there's pin and collar options as well, which for a multi-link bracelet, that could have gotten very finicky. So I'm glad they didn't go pin and collar, although I don't mind pin and collar either, because I'm definitely somebody who sets the bracelet and forgets it. Now, we do have this signed 18mm push button folding clasp with 5 manual micro adjustments. And this is fully milled, even the push buttons, the folding section, of course, nicely contoured as well. And you can see they're proud to be using that 316L. So very cool, very reminiscent of something like you would see on the modern Speedmaster professional clasp styling there. So I think this is overall aesthetically, pretty flawless there. There's not really much if anything, that I would say that they could or should even change, because this thing thematically comes together in a really well-balanced way. But with that said, let's actually get it on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, as you guys can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, or 19 centimeter in circumference wrist, it wears really, really well. And although my wrist is on the larger side of average at 7.5 inches, it's also, quite tall and round. So it's not like this flat, wide, accommodating wrist. So I do have to be, of course, cognizant of things like lug to lug width, overall proportions, and just the general dial to bezel ratio, all the other goodies that go into this kind of mad little watch collecting game that we play. But of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens, you're going to notice all of a sudden the watch just seems much bigger. Check that out. And the sides of my wrist are falling away, and thus the sides of the bracelet. But if I keep my wrist nice and low, it's a much different story. You're seeing more of the bracelet sides. You're seeing the center of the watch laying more centered on the wrist. So again, just a bit of perspective distortion due to the fact that this is being shot on a camera and not with your naked eye. So all I'll do is keep my wrist nice and low and then just tighten up the frame like so that you guys can get still a detailed look, but just add a bit of a truer aspect ratio as to how this may lay on your own wrist. And check that out. I think that looks immaculate. Look at that. I mean, it's not luxury level of finishing or anything like that, but I just think the design-wise, it's just really cohesive. Everything flows. It doesn't look like, and I'm not saying that they didn't do this, but I mean, it doesn't seem like just a bunch of parts kind of chucked together. It feels very thematically complete, and I like that. And look at the way that lays on the wrist. So even though the number's at 13.3 millimeters, it's not the thinnest, but I mean, considering you got a box dome sapphire protruding there for a decent millimeter or two. This technically is quite thin, and I do like the way that it lays, and I like the way that it sits on the wrist, because I think they could probably get away with making it a little bit smaller, although I don't think it's the footprint that's the problem. It's more of the visual impact, because the dial is pushed out quite a bit. It does have a larger dial opening with a kind of thinner bezel. I think if they went thicker bezel, smaller opening, they could leave everything the same, and visually it might wear a little bit more balanced. I think physically it wears perfectly balanced, but again, I think the visual weight, they could probably refine it just a touch, at least just for my preference. By no means is this a deal breaker. I think this is a great looking watch, and if I had it in my collection, I would absolutely wear it. So Wolbrook, if you want to save money on return shipping, let me know, because I would absolutely enjoy wearing this watch, especially now that I've had much better experiences with this Miyota 8000 series movement and the 8315. So with that said, let's go ahead, get it off the wrist, set up for some Lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit the lights here. All right, as you can see, really outstanding Lume, well applied, great compound in BGW9, so very legible, especially with those loomed numerals, which again are going to not just aid in legibility, but also orientation, so you know exactly where 12 o'clock is, denoted by a big old 12. But one thing I do like to work in is going to be a bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. As you guys can see here, the satinization, very smooth, the matte surfaces hold the light very consistently. There's not a lot of dynamic play there like you might get from a sunray dial. So this is going to be, again, very tool-like, very much a legibility functionality first setup. And I think that's what they meant to do. So that's cool. It's not to say I wouldn't enjoy something a little bit more luxe feeling from them, but I think this is right, again, thematically, right down their alley. So very, very cool, guys. I'm feeling it, especially in pure darkness, but then even when you see in the transitional lighting, still going to be quite legible. Really no point where it feels washed out, even with a lot of direct lighting on it. Still, again, legible, clear, and that's what you look for. It does have a countdown bezel, which isn't my favorite. I prefer typically for it to go, start at 0, work its way to 60 versus starting at 60, working its way to 0. So that might be a little something there, but honestly, people will, you're typically, when you're using a dive time bezel as not a diver, it's going to be few and far between. It's very sporadic use there. So I don't think it's going to really upset anything from that perspective. Now, at least in terms of real world usage, I think visually it looks a little cooler, but I will say, this still looks cool. I just noticed that the 10 and the 10 line up. So that's kind of fun. Versus if this was reversed, that would have been the 50 over where the 10 is on the bezel. So, yeah. For me, guys, closing thoughts on the wrist. Really classic Skindiver wear profile with an overbuilt flare without feeling oversized, right? Of course, when we think about watches like from SeaQ, the SPB 143, really kind of a new wave revolution in terms of the love for the Skindiver profile, but slightly upsized into more modern proportions. This definitely feels like in the same vein, but they have a bit more of an open dial and a thinner bezel, which plays to me more vintage-esque, especially when you consider that with even this more robust take on the Beads of Rice bracelet, it still feels quite vintage, which is nice aesthetically. In terms of model variants, do check the site links for current options and availability. And in terms of comparable models, guys, with $500 being many collectors' limit on like an 8000 series powered piece, I think Wolbrook really excel at offering cohesive look and feel that similarly priced and spec divers rarely achieve. This doesn't feel like a mashup of elements, right? It feels like a complete piece top to bottom, which I can appreciate. And I'm not saying they didn't invent the aesthetic, but I will say that they did their homework. The flow of the font, the text types, the numerals, the line weights, the balance on the dial, the lines of text, the choice of, how they spelled out and where they placed their logo. It's just, again, my main critique would be I just generally prefer not a countdown bezel. I prefer the traditional dive time bezel. But by no means would that stop me from enjoying this watch. So again, like, hey, I'm a YouTube review person, so I kind of have to nitpick about things. It doesn't mean that they would be deal breakers for me by any means, because perfect watches don't exist, and the ones that do, you can't have because they're sold out all the time, and you'd have to be on a waiting list, and you'd have to have a purchase history of other watches that weren't perfect. So I am definitely somebody who's learned to embrace the imperfections on watches. So again, it's the quirkiness that makes things different, especially when you have a lot of watches. You want your watches to stand out so you have an excuse to wear them. So for me, guys, bottom line, Wolbrook's Skindiver hits a real sweet spot, representing both value and iconic design. I like that although they're clearly vintage inspired, they do make an effort to upgrade and modernize without overdoing anything, and I've really been pleasantly surprised by the hacking Miyota 8315. Yeah, I was so excited, almost spouted out 9000 series. All right, would it be better with a 9000 series? Absolutely, but it would also probably cost, you know, a couple $100 more. So the fact that you can still get something like this at right around $500, I think is awesome. I'm not saying every $500 watch is this competitive. There's definitely some not great watches that are out there, and there's some not great watches that cost way more than that. So don't just price point hunt. Definitely look in, you know, do the research, get on the YouTube, go to watch meetups and gatherings and watch fairs, get a hands-on with what you can. But for me, guys, although I've experienced quite a few more expensive and cheaper watches, again, I personally believe that this is a nice little sweet spot. So in terms of what you get, bang per buck, dollar per dollar, however you want to look at that. So let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please do a like. And if you're already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.